You may be thinking about a move to the marvelous Twin Cities of Minnesota, Minneapolis and St. Paul, or maybe you just want to explore different parts of the city. But either way, if you want a breakdown of some seriously great neighborhoods of the Twin Cities, then stick around. There is a whole lot of them, but we're going to dive in, and what I have to say might surprise you, but I'm a Minnesota native and I won't steer you wrong. Let's dive into this. I'm going to show you 10 fantastic neighborhoods in the Twin Cities, and I promise you there's a lot more content to come and I won't steer you wrong. So let's start with Northeast. Northeast has become a very trendy place. It's like an art district kind of neighborhood. There are a ton of breweries, some really great restaurants, stores. 2 weeks ago, my husband and I went to trivia at an amazing brewery in Northeast called Bauhaus. It was dog friendly too, which is always a plus. We didn't even come in the top 3 for trivia, but it was so fun. And this week, my husband and I went to this sauna cold plunge place called Embrace North, and it was epic, and it was so challenging to do the cold plunge. It was really, really cold. Northeast is a really good place to live, and it's a very desired place now. And the beauty of it is that it's growing, and there are still houses you can buy that don't cost a ton, and I think the values will continue going up a lot more over time. And what separates the Northeast neighborhood from nearby Camden and near North, which sometimes you'll just hear people calling this North or North Minneapolis, and sometimes people could just consider the whole area North Minneapolis, but what divides Northeast from those two is the river. So the river goes right down and it cuts it off. There's a few bridges that go across it, like Broadway and Lowry. As far as the general demographic of who would live in Northeast, it's going to be, 25 to 40-year-old people, single people or married couple, or sometimes a young family, a married couple with a kid or two. And that is overwhelmingly who you're going to find here. This neighborhood is kind of made for with the breweries and the relative conveniences close to downtown. Good neighborhoods, good food, good drinks. And I want to tell you, this list is not in order of neighborhoods best to worst. It's just kind of in a bit of a geographical order. Next up is downtown, which is technically called Central, which I never hear it called Central. I think of it more as downtown, and that's what other people call it as well. Downtown is all the skyscrapers and all of that kind of thing. And there's neighborhoods like North Loop and Marcy Holmes, Loring Park. They're considered to be here as well. And as far as the demographic and who might be drawn to the downtown area, it's going to be business professionals. At the end of the day, people who don't want to drive very far, who work downtown, and who like a very, very walkable area. You're probably going to have to be paying for underground parking if you work there and you don't live there, or lot parking. And there's just not much in the way of free parking lots in this area. But if you live here and you're parking underground, right underneath your condo, then you can walk just about anywhere. And the Central, downtown, Loring Park, that whole area, it's going to be a really great place for that kind of person, a working professional. And I've also noticed that a lot of active retirees and snowbirds enjoy living downtown as well. So people who love going out, going to the theater, maybe they're active in the community with volunteer work. They love to walk to the grocery store. You can walk to Target, bars, restaurants, even nightlife as well. And this part of town is just ideal for a person who wants to park their car and walk or bike just about everywhere. Now let's hop over to Bde-Makaska. It's formerly known as Calhoun and also Lake of the Isles. So Calhoun was actually the name of the lake. This area, it was called Lake Calhoun, but it was named after a soldier, and he was a racist, and they've since turned it back to Bde-Makaska. And there's certain things where Nokomis and Minnehaha, and now Bde-Makaska, and also Lake of the Isles, and also Lake Harriet. So if you love lake living, these are some gorgeous lakes within the city. And even just living a few blocks away from them, it's very easy to walk or bike over to those lakes and really get to enjoy that lake life, but without the lake tax and the expense of purchasing a home on a lake. The kind of people that tend to be drawn toward these areas is a pretty even split between younger, middle-aged families with growing kids, and they're going to live typically, let's say, in the Kingfield neighborhood or the Kenwood neighborhood. And then kind of more in this area, like the Uptown area, you're going to find the young professionals who want to live somewhere trendy, somewhere walkable, with some nightlife, some bars, also the bike paths. And then there's also going to be students who live over here. The further away you get in these neighborhoods, the more affordable the houses are going to be. Let's talk next about Southwest, which is the next great neighborhood in the Twin Cities. Southwest has some of the best schools. Edina is the most expensive first ring suburb in the entire Twin Cities, and Southwest is a great neighborhood, and the houses here are really beautiful. It's a relatively peaceful place in the cities. There's great schools like South and Southwest, and the Tangletown neighborhood is really great. This really interesting, unique neighborhood. They call it Tangletown because if you look at the map, it looks really crazy, like tangled hair. Kind of hard to wrap your head around the actual neighborhood, but that's because of the landscape. There's a creek and a lot of hills through here, and they just worked around the landscape. So it's not going to be just a standard grid in this neighborhood. Lake Harriet is a beautiful, beautiful lake. This whole chain of lakes, people will run around the whole thing or bike around them. And it's really a nice thing to do. As far as who's going to be living in the Southwest neighborhood, overwhelmingly, we're going to see families with pretty good income. There are great schools. It's a quiet neighborhood. It's a great place to raise a family. And it is priced accordingly. And that brings us to the next neighborhood, which is Nokomis. And Lake Nokomis is an absolutely beautiful lake. Again, really, really great neighborhood. I did a triathlon in Lake Nokomis a couple of years ago, the swimming portion in the lake, and then the rest on the bike paths and run paths around it, and it is really beautiful. There are a ton of houses here. There are some businesses, some really great small businesses in here. Mostly there's not many chain stores in this area, other than maybe gas stations and, a Starbucks here or there, but there is a Starbucks in most places. And the architecture of the houses here, it's really beautiful. We see a lot of craftsman style architecture to these houses, and the Nokomis area has a really great display of that kind of house. The kind of people that are going to be living in the Nokomis neighborhood, to be honest, not a whole lot different than the people living in the Southwest neighborhood, except that these houses are generally going to be a little more affordable. And kind of as you get further to the east, you get less expensive houses because you get closer to the airport. And so probably a sweet spot of the most expensive houses in the Nokomis area is kind of being right in the middle. And then maybe even as you begin to border Southwest. And then again, as you get closer to Minnehaha Falls, it's going to start to get a little more expensive as well. But there are some people who rent over here, some families and young people who own houses, and it is a great neighborhood. That brings us to the next neighborhood, which is the Longfellow neighborhood. Longfellow is considered basically anything east of Hiawatha, Highway 55, and probably south of 94. Longfellow is home to one of the most beautiful natural attractions of the Twin Cities, which is Minnehaha Falls. Minnehaha Falls is a beautiful park with great walking trails. Obviously, there's a waterfall there, and it has a ton of bike paths around here and a lot of areas where people go to just hang out, have a picnic during the summertime. There's even a disc golf course in the Minnehaha Park. And Minnehaha Park basically runs all the way over to the river. Beautiful view. It's a main bridge, which is 46, and that runs over to Highland Park. When it hits Highland Park, it turns into Ford Parkway, which is where the old Ford plant used to be. It was purchased and turned into the Highland Bridge community, which is a huge housing and community development. Another demographic that you're going to find in Longfellow, it's going to be similar in some ways to what you would find in Nokomis, but more affordable for property prices. And it's going to be younger families a lot of the time, and some single people, maybe people on their starter home, and people just starting out their families. And it is more affordable here typically than Southwest or Bede-Makaska or Lake of the Isles. It's generally, I would say, a little bit quieter. There's not much in the way of nightlife and that kind of thing. More people who just want a nice neighborhood to live in. Still very bikeable. There's still some really great restaurants, but overwhelmingly we're just talking about houses all throughout with a couple sort of main streets with some great restaurants on them. And I started to talk about Highland Park a minute ago. Highland Park is a beautiful neighborhood, and as far as demographic goes of who tends to be drawn towards it, there are really great little pockets of neighborhoods throughout Highland, and they're really peaceful, and some of the single family homes may be renters, but nonetheless they're great homes. And there are some really, really nice neighborhoods in Highland with higher priced properties. There also are some condos and bigger sort of apartment buildings here as well. Highland has some great little restaurants and cafes. Highland Grill has been around forever. Cecil's Deli is so good too. And now that we're in St. Paul, that's going to bring me to the next neighborhood. It's a small neighborhood, but it is beautiful with some really, really great homes, and that's Summit Hill. Summit Avenue is probably the best known street in all of Minnesota, and it runs all the way through here. Basically, more or less, it runs through it, and it has the governor's mansion on it, and it basically has the most majestic and grand homes in the entire Twin Cities, and they're mostly all historic for the most part. I'm sure there's some new ones, but they're just these beautiful grand historic mansions. And then just one street south is Grand Avenue, which is where a lot of really trendy shops and restaurants and coffee shops and yoga studios and gyms. And those shops, they tend to be more on this side of towards the Summit Hill area than even the McGroveland area, which also has some really lovely neighborhoods and some restaurants and shops. But McGroveland neighborhood tends to be more of a college area. And then right around Grand and Lexington, right over there is where it starts to get really trendy, and there's a lot of great shops and great food and that kind of thing. The demographic for the Summit Hill area, I would say it's varied, and probably some of the really wealthy people in the state probably at certain parts live along Summit. And then as you go further towards the West 7th neighborhood, it starts to get a bit more affordable and maybe a bit less quiet, a little less neighborhoody. There are some great restaurants there. There's a ton of Italian restaurants in West 7th. A lot of Italian immigrants settled in this area when they came to Minnesota. So there's some really well-known established Italian restaurants and steakhouses in West 7th. And the next neighborhood is the downtown area, so known as Lower Town. And I'll say that this neighborhood is changing a lot, and it can be a little hard to get a read on which part you'd want to live in or not. This neighborhood is downtown St. Paul. It's right where a bunch of the biggest employers in the cities used to be before COVID. And then some of them haven't had the employees come back to work, so it's difficult to tell what will happen. There's some really beautiful architecture down here. Some of the old historic St. Paul skyscrapers. And in the Lower Town neighborhood, there's a beautiful farmer's market. There's some light rail stops. You can walk along the river. And there's a lot of condos and townhomes here that will have water views. So if a water feature is important to you, but you're looking to do it in a more affordable way, downtown or Lower Town would be a great area to look, because you can get some really beautiful riverfront property. So for who's going to be living in downtown, a lot of it's going to be young professionals, couples who want to live downtown. Maybe they want a cool apartment, a historic apartment with some history and some architecture and a beautiful city view, but they don't want just as much hustle and bustle and nightlife that you would see over in downtown Minneapolis. It is a different lifestyle in downtown St. Paul over downtown Minneapolis. The people who want to live in the city want to walk, but they don't want the sort of chaos of nightlife, then this could be a really good spot for them. The next neighborhood is going to make the list is the Como Park neighborhood. And there are a ton of neighborhoods that I could mention still, but this list is getting really long. Como Park, this is another one of the lakes, and we are the land of 10,000 lakes here in Minnesota. So a lot of the places that I mentioned have lakes or water features, rivers. People love to walk around Como Lake, not to be confused with Lake Como, which is where George Clooney has a house in Italy. Como is just a really great neighborhood here in Minnesota. There is something called Como Park. It's a beautiful arboretum and also even a zoo with some animals. And at the time of filming, it is still free, but you know that they're talking about starting to charge for that. Huge parks with walking trails, peaceful, beautiful homes, and the kind of people who are going to be living in the Como Park neighborhood, it's going to be families. It's a great little neighborhood. In general, it has smaller homes, maybe on average 3-bedroom homes, some really great Tudors as far as architecture style, very walkable and bikeable. And I don't mean in the sense that you're gonna walk to the shops. There's not a lot of shops in most parts of this neighborhood, but just kind of in the recreational way. People come here and they love to take a stroll or take a bike around the park. Now, I want to know what's your favorite neighborhood. And if you're not from here, maybe you've heard a little bit about one neighborhood, or you've seen that houses are pretty affordable in another area and you want to know what they're about. So get a hold of me. I'm really happy to talk about this stuff. I really just want to be a resource for people. Thanks for watching.